Once upon a time there lived a queen who had been the mother of a great many children, and of them all only one daughter was left, but she was worth at least 1,000. Her mother, since the death of the king, her father, had been terribly afraid of losing her and quite spoiled her. The consequence was the little princess grew up proud and in love with her own beauty. The queen's actions reinforced the belief that there was nothing too good for her, and as a result Bellissima, as the princess was named, despised everyone else. She was dressed in the prettiest frocks, often as a fairy or a hunting queen, and the queen sent her portrait to neighboring kings who fell in love with her. The princess received constant admiration and attentions, becoming more vain. Bellissima was already 15 years old, and though many princes wished to marry her, none dared to say so as she cared little for anyone. The queen, wishing to see her daughter married, grew increasingly frustrated. Finally, she decided to consult the fairy of the desert, guarded by lions. To safely pass the lions, the queen prepared a special cake made of millet flour, sugar candy, and crocodile's eggs. She set out but soon tired and fell asleep under a tree. When she awoke, the cake was gone and lions approached. Terrified, she cried out. Just then she saw a tiny yellow man in the tree who called himself the Yellow Dwarf. He offered to save her if she promised her daughter to him in marriage. Terrified and seeing no other option, the queen agreed. The Yellow Dwarf whisked her away to his humble home and showed her the miserable life he would provide for Bellissima, causing the queen to faint. When she awoke, she was back in her own bed, but the memory of her promise haunted her. The princess, worried for her mother's sadness, decided to seek advice from the fairy of the desert and set out with a cake for the lions. However, she was stopped by the Yellow Dwarf who claimed he could help her. He told her about her mother's promise, and as lions approached, Bellissima, in her terror, agreed to marry him. She fell unconscious and awoke in her bed with a ring made of red hair she could not remove, realizing the truth of the dwarf's claim. The princess's sadness was evident, alarming the court who pressured the queen to arrange a marriage. Bellissima, wanting to escape the dwarf, agreed to marry the king of the gold mines, a handsome and generous prince who adored her. The wedding preparations were grand, but as the ceremony was about to begin, the fairy of the desert appeared with basilisks and reminded the queen of her promise. The queen and princess were confronted with the reality of their broken promise, and the fairy threatened them to marry the Yellow Dwarf or face dire consequences. Once upon a time, in a land filled with magic and wonder, there lived a brave and noble king known as the King of the Gold Mines. His heart was kind, and he fell deeply in love with the beautiful Princess Bellissima. However, their love was cursed by the wicked fairy of the desert and her accomplice, the nasty Yellow Dwarf. One fateful day, the king, Bellissima, and her mother found themselves trapped by these evil beings. The Yellow Dwarf, a hideous and wicked creature, claimed Bellissima as his own, showing a ring made from his hair on her finger. Enraged, the king challenged the dwarf to single combat. While they fought fiercely, the wicked fairy of the desert struck Bellissima with a vicious blow, causing her to fall senseless. In the chaos, the Yellow Dwarf seized Bellissima and escaped to his castle of steel. The king, filled with despair, suddenly found himself blinded and transported by the fairy to a dark cavern where she tried to win his love. But the king's heart belonged solely to Bellissima. The clever king pretended to be charmed by the fairy, using his wit to gain her trust. She took him to a beautiful place, thinking she had won. But our brave king saw his chance when a kind mermaid appeared, offering to help him. She showed him where Bellissima was trapped, and gave him a magical sword to help him rescue her. The king fought through terrifying sphinxes and dragons with his diamond sword, showing his fearless love for Bellissima. And so the king and Bellissima returned to their kingdom, where they ruled happily ever after, their love growing stronger with each passing day. "Ah, princess," he cried, "do not be angry with me. Let me explain everything. I am not faithless or to blame for what has happened. I am a miserable wretch who has displeased you without being able to help himself. Ah! cried Bellissima. Did I not see you flying through the air with the loveliest being imaginable? Was that against your will? Indeed it was, Princess, he answered. The wicked fairy of the desert, not content with chaining me to a rock, carried me off in her chariot to the other. Ah! cried Bellissima. Did I not see you flying through the air with the loveliest being imaginable? Was that against your will? Indeed it was, Princess, he answered. The wicked fairy of the desert, not content with chaining me to a rock, carried me off in her chariot to the other end of the earth. Do not refuse the aid of your most faithful lover. So saying, he threw himself at her feet and held her by her robe. But alas! In so doing he let fall the magic sword, and the Yellow Dwarf, who was crouching behind a lettuce, no sooner saw it than he sprang out and seized it, well knowing its wonderful power. The princess gave a cry of terror on seeing the dwarf, but this only irritated the little monster. Muttering a few magical words, he summoned 2 giants, who bound the king with great chains of iron. Now, said the dwarf, I am master of my rival's fate, but I will give him his life and permission to depart unharmed if you, princess, will consent to marry me. Let me die 1,000 times rather, cried the unhappy king. Alas! cried the princess, must you die? Could anything be more terrible? That you should marry that little wretch would be far more terrible, answered the king. At least, continued she, let us die together. Let me have the satisfaction of dying for you, my princess, said he. Oh no, no, she cried, turning to the dwarf. Rather than that I will do as you wish. Cruel princess, said the king, would you make my life horrible to me by marrying another before my eyes? Not so, replied the Yellow Dwarf. You are a rival of whom I am too much afraid. You shall not see our marriage. So saying, in spite of Bellissima's tears and cries, he stabbed the king to the heart with the diamond sword. The poor princess, seeing her lover lying dead at her feet, could no longer live without him. She sank down by him and died of a broken heart. So ended these unfortunate lovers, whom not even the mermaid could help, because all the magic power had been lost with the diamond sword. As to the wicked dwarf, he preferred to see the princess dead rather than married to the king of the gold mines, and the fairy of the desert, when she heard of the king's adventures, pulled down the grand monument which she had built. The kind mermaid, grieved at the sad fate of the lovers, caused them to be changed into 2 tall palm trees, which stand always side by side, whispering together of their faithful love and caressing one another with their interlacing branches.